Here we're looking at a peach tree and the form pruning to achieve a healthy tree. We've got one over the back there we've already done, and we've basically started with a small seedling. We've headed it back to this height. We've grown out 3 litres and divided it at various stages to spread the canopy as the tree comes up. We're trying to prune to an outside facing bud. So if we were looking at something of this nature, that's a branch which is going back into the centre of the tree, which is non-advantageous in terms of it's going to shade light to this bit here. So I'm going to take that off just so we can look at how we develop the overall structure of the tree. Hang on. Right, so there we have a branch which could represent the tree we were going to try and define into a wider V-shaped tree. Generally we try and open that structure out. We've grown up, we've actually got 2 points, say if it was a seedling tree. So when you're selecting a tree from a nursery, you're looking for your branch structure in terms of what branches are going to give me that outward, facilitate that outward movement as we develop the vase, so that it's palmetting as we get up. So first thing I want to do is take this apical dominance of the tree out. We'll take that one out, and you can see instantly you've got a more balanced tree. So it's that overall effect we're trying to achieve, but we want in a vase a ring of branches around that tree. So if I was planting this out of a bare root tree, I might put the stronger branches to the south like that, because I know I'm going to get stronger growth from the north. The first thing I'll do is I'll take any unwanted branches low down here, so that we're basically achieving a trunk in the tree. Now as that goes out, we'll take the inward facing branches, these guys that are coming back towards the centre of the tree, which we want to keep open. We'll take those out. So anything that's coming out can fill in a space, we'll keep. So this should fill in that side of the tree there. We've really got nothing coming out to the north. So we may be able to put some growth into that. It's quite weak at the moment. You can see what's happening here. We've got one dominant one in the middle and 3 branches heading out in the right direction to widen that vase. So by taking that centre one out, we'll push the energy into 3 of them, which will widen the vase. Again here, one going straight up, push it into an outside facing one. In terms of bringing our overall canopy up, we don't want branches that are going to end up touching the ground, so we'll tend to take that one off. So when you buy a new tree, don't be scared to take branches off to look at the form and shape that you want to achieve. So we talk about fruits, not roots, for the first 3 seasons, because we're trying to develop the structure in the tree that can support the fruit and give you easy to pick low-hanging fruit. The peaches in particular have a fruit on 1-year wood, so you're looking at this new growth. Out on the ends here is going to be your fruiting wood for next year. So again, I'm looking back into the structure here and saying this one's going to be quite dominant and start competing with this one, which is my outward structure. So we'll take him out, and I'll take that centre one out. So there's our palmetting from those 3. It's going to start to fill that vase out. I could pull that one over to here and that one down to there, and they will, by pruning to an outside facing bud, we should get some palmetting happening out in that region, and that will start to give us that open vase shape in the centre here. So we go back to a bigger tree, we can then look at how that has worked for us. Overall spacings of trees, these were actually probably packed in a little bit tight for a vase shaped tree. Could be about 4 metres between trees, up to 6 for the bigger plums. We've got 1, 2, 3 here, so another metre and these wouldn't tend to get all this upright, vigorous growth. So most of this wood, this last year's growth up here and 2-year growth, will produce fruit. With the weight of fruit, that'll come over and make it easy to pick. So yeah, we're using an understory management of grazing, so our canopy height has got to be a little higher than you would in a home orchard. You might sort of have this whole palmetting situation here starting at about here, and so a lot of this stuff here, which I can't quite pick, would then come down to about here. So it's all a matter of doing those heading cuts at the right height. So if you're getting a big vegetative branch coming up in the summer, before Christmas you can head that to an outside facing bud, and that will develop that outward tier structure of 2 to 3 branches. This tree here, got quite a bit of upright growth. I can take these 1-year, 2-year rods here in the summer and pull them over like that, cracking them into there. And that, once it gets to that angle, it'll fruit a lot better than it would otherwise. I've actually not achieved much there because the sap's not flowing, so they will snap out if you try and train them during the winter, so that one will have to take off. Now, from previous seasons fruiting, we've got a lot of deadwood in this tree. That deadwood is quite easy to define because when you cut into it, it'll be quite black, and it'll just, if you scratch it with your fingernail, there'll be no green in there, as opposed to, see if we can find a bit of nice fresh stuff. Here we go. So that's fairly spent and dying. So you see the nice plump buds on the 1-year growth, which is alive. So there's quite a lot of, I'll just do this one limb out to about here. There's quite a lot of work to clean up dead wood in there and just leave anything that still looks quite live. Peaches, as opposed to plums, have a lot of that dead wood. So we just work out on the branch, looking for that dead wood. If you're unsure, use your fingernail to scratch the wood to see whether it's live or not. If we find a sucker coming from the inside of the tree that can perhaps trained into a space here which is open, this has got fairly good branching all the way around, then we might bring that in and we can tie it, peg it down, tie it with a bit of string, or hang a milk bottle on it if it's a bigger branch. Something this size. Should it be sitting in there like that? It's too upright, we want to bring it over like that. Just fill your milk bottle with a bit of water and hang it up on one of these branches, and that'll just bring the weight down a bit. So yeah, we can see we've cleaned out to about there. Most of this is fairly light, will come over with the weight of fruit. Anything stronger like this, going back toward the centre of the tree, non-advantageous. It's going to take the dominance out of it'll take the energy out of the tree because it's at the highest point. So peaches, having grown in a forest situation, have a habit of being quite upright and strong. So the other way you can grow them is on a more intensive regime of about 2.5 metres a plate. You might buy a nursery tree like that, and we'll grow what's called a central leader tree. So we'll take off these bottom branches down here. We know we've got good branching in that tree, so we're looking at establishing a north-south east facing tier system. So ideally what we're looking for from this is a nice branch structure like that in another year. Now that would represent itself at 4 points ideally, so I look for 4 strong branches in here, and then the others we'll just take back to 1 bud and let them fire off some, so it's an outside facing bud, but they'll fire off shallower, smaller fruiting arms on that main trunk. So that's what I'm looking for there. And there you can see your east-west. They'll be either with a small bit of wood spaced in here until we've got that angle, that crotch angle in here, what we call a crotch angle. And in another year or two we'll have this structure here. So that is, unlike the vase where you're doing 2/3 of your work up the top of the tree, this will give you 2/3 of your fruit and your pruning on this lower tier structure. So it's more like a pine tree shape, you can sort of see. The reason we have sort of the north-south-east facing tiers is a ladder bay will come in here if you need to do any work on the top of the tree. You can facilitate easy access with a one-legged ladder. So again, that one, after the season, I might take up this upright growth and just leave that outward growth. Smaller stuff that'll come over the way to fruit, you'd leave it in there. So you can imagine that branch is that branch in another year. That's what you're trying to achieve. So as I say, 2.5 metre spacings in a small garden situation. Because of its upright form, the peach, it lends itself quite well to the central leader. We're sort of stuck with the vase here. We've done a bit of training with strings to bring them down. Unfortunately, our sheep got a little bit cunning when we were pulling them down like this. We had them tied back to the trunk. They put their chin on the string and then pull the branches down, and some of them were breaking. So yeah, a lot of it, what I've done on this tree over here, we'll go over and have a look. I let them get some good extension growth on them. Then I was able to take a rod like that, holding it in here in the summer, and just swing on it a bit like this till I got a slight crack, and at that point that branch stayed at that angle. So that's quite a good little trick. It just takes a bit of getting a feel for it so you don't break your branch out in here, but that'll actually achieve it. And we'll do the same in the summer with these. We'll just bring these down to here, and you see how that's starting to fan out and fill the space that we've got to represent. Once it's got a bit of fruit on and a bit of sap coming up, we can just crank those over. So we're looking for this sort of 1 year, 2 year replacement growth to this on this main structure. Take a break. Okay, this is a plum tree which is probably now about 6 years old, so you can see how we've divided it out into its various sort of arms that have formed the shape of the tree. And then from there we've got some nice easy low hanging fruit in this area here. That's coming from the tree next to it. Again, this could have been another 2 meters out. This is probably about close to your 4 meters here, but could have been 6 because these big Japanese plums, I've left one big arm here, and you can see how strong they are. So I'm trying to take the apical dominance out by leaving one here that a few birds may sit in and get their share, but the rest, the lower stuff around here, we're just looking for that lighter branching all the time that will come across with the fruit, the weight of fruit, come down with the weight of fruit, rather than create big arms like this which tend to dominate the tree. So going back to this tree, you can see we've opened the whole centre of it out, and we've got our various branching. Some of them are crossing over, but as long as they're not rubbing, it's not a problem. So it's about filling that space in the canopy around your tree. There's as much lighter branching. As far as regenerative pruning on something like this, we could come into the north side of the tree, cut this back quite hard here at some stage when we felt that was getting a bit more tired out there. We could work on half of the tree in 1 year, hit back, regrow some new shoots, and layer them to reform the palmetted vase shape. So that's something we can do in the future. But yeah, I'd advise, look at the type of tree you're going to grow, whether it be a pear tree, which is more upright and spurry. Put that to the back where there's more light. Something that's more outward like the plum can go in front of that, and then you're breaking into things like peaches, persimmons, citrus, that sort of thing, more at the front of that, so no tree is sort of shadowing the other. If you're wanting to prune some branches higher up in a tree and you're on uneven ground as we are here, you can use one of your prunings and create a hooky stick. That basically pulls your branch down to where you want it. And fairly important with that pruning cut is not to do that, which I've just created a coat hanger, not unlike my hooky stick here. Now that will, because there are no live buds on that point, that will tend to die back beyond this branch here. So it'll create disease back into the tree and further up that branch. So we must, if you look at online about how to make a rose pruning cut, that's what we're trying to achieve with most of our pruning cuts. And we'll look back at one of those other trees, how I've done that with a saw. and how we protect it with the pruning paint. So of course anything that's a little bit upright, if I want to maintain the more outward growth, I can come in and pull some of these more flexible guys down and just prune to an outside facing branch. That's quite a good little trick with this guy. You can just go around your around your tree without having to leave the ground. That one there's a bit upright, and that one I'll take the strong one out of the middle and let the other two come out. Come summer we'll pull that over like that, just so we get a better angle on it, either with weight or with string. The string situation is quite good in that what we're trying to do, we tie it back to a staple in the base of the tree. We pull our branch over to about where we want it, bring the string over, determine, whoops, hang on, I've lost that one, try again. Right, we're going to run out of string there. I'll just pinch another bit here, make it a little bit longer. I usually have a ball of string so I can pull off the length that I want. Otherwise you can go to your local stables and get some old baling twine like this. Bring that branch over, come over. You don't want to loop it round and tie a knot around the branch, so determine where you want that branch to sit, which is slightly above the horizontal, and your knot's going to come in where my fingers are. So this pruning paint is based on a nano silica, which actually has a wicking effect on any sap that's in the plant. It lets it wick away, and it also has effective microorganisms in there which actually dominate the wound site rather than foreign bacteria or fungi getting in. So we're introducing something on there which is advantageous rather than not advantageous, and that will that'll dry fairly quickly, but if the sap's running it'll allow it to come away again. So we've got that plant heal, and we've got it out to the kiwi fruit industry, and the grape industry are loving it, so yeah, it's a great product. Right, so what we're looking at here is a Monty Surprise apple tree, which is the anti-cancer apple, and we've grown it on a central leader system, so we've got those in various spacings through the orchard here experimentally. Conventional boys are growing on a dwarf rootstock at about metre spacings. We're on a semi-dwarf and organic. Normally this tree would probably be another, growing it with conventional chemicals, it could be another 2 metres higher. So we've about this 2.5 metre spacings is what we've come back to. So we headed the tree at about this height after grafting, and grew out a series of strong branches, which I've then waited till the weight of fruit was on those long upright ones, and then I've cranked the branches over, so we've got this lovely sort of umbrella form, and you can see how it's palmetted out into its fruiting branches. Because this particular apple fruits on this 1-year wood on the tips, these will come over and fall into that space quite nicely. I take out this one because he's quite upright and dominant, competing with that central leader. So we're just looking for that lighter stuff that will come over with the weight of fruit. That'll give me 2/3 of my fruit at an easy picking height. We've got an understory management with the sheep, a mixed herbal lay which we're going to incorporate in red clover and dandelion this spring. And yeah, just get a little bit of nutrient recycling there. Yeah, that's a tree that's been headed back, and now we can just bring those branches over into their various north, south, east positions, leaving this one in the centre, which will be the dominant one. So basically at the end of it, you'll end up with all these down to about that height, and that one going up the centre, restructuring your tree. So you can top work a tree the same way by grafting into the top of that trunk with one graft with that 6 buds on it. You can achieve this after a year, which then can be retrained into position. We've got a greenhouse here that we did dried a trial crop of hemp in last year, so it's never had a crop in it as such. So this year we're going to have the sheep camp on the straw through the house there, build up the fertility, and then we'll scratch that straw back, go through a little Kubota rotary hoe we've got here, and do a light tilth, get a seed bed, and after that we'll try and maintain that as a no dig situation. So we'll probably get a tilth about that deep, and we'll be growing heritage tomatoes in there, the gold tomatoes, which have got the high lycopene for their anti-cancer properties against prostate cancer. After going to a workshop by Stefan Sokoviak and looking at his model of orcharding, we have duplicated the grazing model over there by default. We're looking at this espalier orchard, which we've established our first tier on. So we planted these as quite tall rods, not unlike this, and pulled one branch down to the east and one to the west, and from that, with this Monty Surprise being a tip grower, we've got quite good tip growth right along that leader system. So they'll come over with a weight of fruit to about there, and then they'll palm it off from there. So we should end up with quite a nice wall of fruit. We'll start our second tier situation from these two here. So that'll sit at about this height, and then we'll do another one at the top of that post basically. So to facilitate that with this particular tree, I'd have to do a heading cut to a bud around about there. Come spring, that'll start to put out the two that I want to lay along the wire. Some of them have already started going, but it's a little bit hit and miss as to which it'll be different times that I've got to actually work with before I establish that second tier. But in the same time frame, I'm going to probably have fruit on this in the second year, so that'll potentially give us a bit of income. So if we step into the row here, we've got about 3.6 between our rows. Grass has been a major competitor with fruit trees, and the main orchard over there would use scything in and around the tree, so we're able to bring all that nutrient in and have a good sward around the drip line of the young tree. Here we've used strips of weed mat which got overtaken by this fog grass, so by laying down this 3.6 weed mat over winter, we'll fallow that ground to the point that my little Kubota rotary hoe will be able to create that back into a seed bed, and then we'll look at doing various intercrops, whether it be salad green vegetables or intensive 1 year nursery plants for fruit trees. So we're quite excited about this. I may look at putting some comfrey in the areas just around the tree, because I'll get a little bit of grass coming up through there, and the comfrey is a very good recycler of potassium and other nutrients, non-competitive with the fruit tree roots, because the fruit trees tend to go out and are quite shallow. They're being competed with more by that grass. So if this is successful and we can get that sort of the two incomes coming from just the trees and the intercrops, then we'll use this as our blanket sheets, and we'll continue them on breaking in ground right through that orchard on a rotation. We'll use them again if we could introduce chooks into the situation. There's all sorts of possibilities. But yeah, your biggest battle in permaculture is grass as your competitive weed. So this looking at Curtis Stone and Stefan Sokoviak seems to be the answer to beating it. I was going to use polythene, and you could use polythene if you can't afford the weed mat, but you won't get the length of life out of it, and it will be a more anaerobic environment. There's a bit of breathability and permeability about the water moving through the weed mat. With the polythene, you haven't got that. So I think, an investment in 300 metres, there's only 100 metres down here at this stage, is quite a good investment for the future in terms of weed management and soil management.